Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to talk about this year's annual Clean Power Market Report. I'm Kelsey Hallahan, ACP's Senior Director of Market Intelligence, and I am joined today with two of my colleagues, John Hensley, Senior Vice President of Markets and Policy Analysis, and Anthony Fratto, Senior Director of Research and Analysis. And so we're doing things a little bit differently this year with our annual market report presentation. The first thing is not a presentation. We have some fabulous resources for you all to peruse. Links will be in the chat that I think kind of cover the main key highlights and great charts of the report. So we have an interactive web page. We have the full report, all 87 pages available to members. And we also have a public summary version of the report that I encourage you all to check out. These resources are all great, standalone. And we thought, we have an hour with you guys, so it might be more interesting for us to kind of dive into kind of the stories behind the charts, what we think about some of these key dynamics, while also along the way kind of giving you all a sense for what is in the report and what you might get out of it and what you would find useful for your work and your understanding of the industry. So before we jump into it, what is in this year's report? So we, as many of you know, did a Q4 2025 report that kind of launched all of the 2025 full year data trends that we track. So how much clean power capacity was added, where was it added, what is the pipeline looking like, both under construction and advanced development, and really, looking through some of those deeper trends of each of the technologies and procurement trends. So check that out if you haven't already. And this year's full annual market report, so we had that Q4 report. This one focused a lot more on all of the clean power benefits. So economic benefits, looking at jobs, investment, contributions to the US economy. We have some great sections on, what is the role of clean power in the overall electricity market in the United States. A lot of these charts and maps and graphs, I find I use them year round. They're a great reference. They're evergreen until the next one, some of them, and are really a good, kind of tool to reference in your work. We also have our clean power leadership rankings. So we look at the top developers, top owners, top clean power buyers. And we also tried this year to provide a little bit more resources on, tables of where are the top states, the top counties, top congressional districts for those of you who are in advocacy or federal affairs. So all of this plus our outlook, where do we see the market going, all combined into, I think, a really great report. And I'm excited for you all to kind of dive into that on your own and with us as we talk about the report today. So without further ado, let's get started. So we've all seen record year for clean power deployments, over 50 gigawatts of utility scale solar, wind, and storage installed. Well over, we have 91% of everything added to the US grid. And I'm hoping to hear, first from John and then Anthony, what do you both think were some of the key drivers for this boom in deployments?
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. And I'm going to do a little bit of a bump and run here to start things. I'll get to the question, we'll dive into it. But I want to, just throw out some congratulations to Anthony and Kelsey and the team for putting this report together. This is a large undertaking. We spend hours week in and week out putting this report together, trying to not only understand what are the key trends, highlights, industry statistics that are going to be important to help you as members really understand what's going on in the clean power space, but also to inform our advocacy actions as well, right? we always want to be putting our best foot forward, telling those stories that are compelling, that are showcasing the economic benefits, the investments, the job creation, those storylines that really resonate with members of Congress and folks around the country to understand the impact and the size of our industry and the benefits that it's bringing to the country. So we spent a lot of time thinking about those various elements. Now, this is my 14th report at ACP, formerly OEA. The through line has been, fairly consistent over that entire time frame, right? Like, we really like talking about the economic benefits, the job creation story, and really understanding the role of clean energy technology in the broader electric system. And those stories go a long way. I think they do a great job of showcasing not only the growth of the industry, but the impact that we are having as an industry in this space. So big kudos to you guys for putting together what I think is an excellent report, and just a plea to our members to actually download the thing, look at it, put it on your desk. It's really designed to be a reference material for you, right? Like, all the bullet points are designed to be, bite-sized and easy to lift out and just drop in memos or PowerPoint decks or other avenues, right? The whole intent is to make this resource that is citable and easily available to you as members. So very much encourage everybody to take advantage of that, and also let us know, like, where do you think we could take things in a different direction? What are additional data points, trends, et cetera, that you would like us to focus on? All right, I'll hop off on my soapbox and actually talk about the 50 gigawatt number. It comes at an interesting time, right? We're obviously mired in a lot of challenging administrative issues for the industry. Very difficult to move new projects forward in the country at the moment, given some of the siting, permitting, and regulatory challenges that we're seeing. Yet at the same time, there has been this huge momentum that's been built up that has allowed us in the industry to achieve this incredible milestone of 15 gigawatts of new wind, solar, and battery storage deployed in the year. And I think as an industry, one of the things that we need to be thoughtful and careful about is to really define and describe that situation correctly. So yeah, we had a 50 gigawatt year. I think 26 is going to be as big, if not bigger, but it's all coming at the backdrop of a very challenging development environment. And we as an industry need to be highlighting those challenges and trying to find workable solutions to move those projects forward. And at the same time, pointing to the fact that it was the existence of a favorable policy environment 3, 4, 5 years in the past that has enabled these record levels of deployment. And if we don't find solutions to some of these challenges, being able to maintain that momentum, continuing to deliver for the grid, is going to be a real challenge. One of the things that I find to be most concerning in this space, right, is that we've got an industry that is ready to go. We're there on the economics. The technology is mature, commercially available, quick to deploy. We've got all these projects in the queues. We've basically done the homework and are ready to deliver for the industry. And yet, because of these administrative actions and regulatory barriers that have been put up, it is becoming increasingly challenging for us to deliver on that. And it comes at a time where it's really important, right? We've seen demand growth accelerate. We're seeing challenges around affordability. We're seeing challenges around retail rates and the directionality that they're headed. Plus, you throw in these weather events and other kind of grid stressing factors, and it becomes very clear and apparent that we need to add power to the system quickly, and we need to do it affordably as well. And the good news is we've got the technology to do that with wind, solar, and storage. I think the challenging news is that it's become more difficult to do it.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add on to that is, and John mentioned this, is that pipe. If anyone's been reading the annual report for the last few years, you have seen we've had a massive pipeline. So it is not necessarily surprising to me that we have all these projects coming online. And to John's point, it's been years kind of in the making, and there's so much more that we could be adding to the grid because the pipeline is very robust. I'd say the big thing that stands out to me, though, in terms of drivers is it does come down to economics. If you look at any of the charts in the annual report that highlight where all this clean power is being built, the vast majority are in those, red districts, red states. They're being built in areas that do not have RPS policies or carbon prices, like wind, solar storage. That is being built because it makes sense from both the developer's perspective and the customer perspective. And I just think it kind of highlights that when you look at it regionally. And maybe the last thing I'd talk to in terms of that 50 gigawatts is the storage component, which when I first kind of started modeling in the electricity grid space, there was no large scale battery storage deployment, and it's grown significantly. And I think it's interesting to look at how battery storage growth has timed pretty well with solar. Wind has been pretty consistent throughout the US, but solar, we have seen these increases the last few years. And storage, that's part of its whole kind of basis, is that it can charge with cheap electricity and discharge when the grid needs it most. And you can see those dynamics as all this solar has been added to California, Arizona, Texas. Those are the same 3 states that battery storage is being deployed as well.
No, absolutely. I remember, even speaking of early career, when I first started working in energy, I spent some time as a energy markets reporter, and I pitched a story about when would battery deployments start to affect, natural gas demand in California. And I pitched it, and I did some interviews, and all the interviews came back, and they were like, never. It will basically, like, maybe 2040. And we're already starting to see that. So the deployment has just been like so much more rapid than I think anyone predicted. They squashed the story because it was considered a nothing burger. And now I'm not on the record officially as putting that out there. But well, I think, kind of picking from all of those factors, one of the things that I think is the hot topic at many conferences is load growth, of course. And we have a variety of slides in the annual report that look at, annual, like, both peak load growth projections and then, just in general load growth. And so I'd love, Anthony, what can you tell us about the current projections for load growth?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to start off with a historical context of load growing, which, if you look, for those of us that work in the industry, load has been growing at 1% rate for the last 20 years, but that is not new. It has been growing since the 1950s at 2, 4, 6% a year. That is very common. The problem that we're in now is that the last 20 years, we've gotten so used to a very energy efficient system. Our everything that we put in our homes, our light bulbs, all of that does a lot in terms of energy efficiency and has reduced our amount of electricity that we require every day in our homes. But we are now getting into a point where there's kind of 3 main drivers of growing load: manufacturing, electrification of building and transportation, and the buzzword of the day, data centers. And so that is where those projections, you get a wide variety of them. I'd say electrification has slowed down in terms of how much we expect to come online, but the baseline is it's still growing. Manufacturing has started to steadily uptick again, but data centers, that is where you get these wide range in load growth projections. And you can see when you look at the annual report that we say load is growing in the US, but it is not equal across the US. It is in very specific locations. So Virginia, Texas, their systems, in the case of Virginia, they already have a lot of data centers built out. They have policies that support data center build out. Texas has a lot of has a lot of extra electricity and cheap electricity. But then manufacturing, you see that in the Rust Belt, Arizona, Georgia, and the like. And electrification, those are more coastal kind of issues. And so I'd say the big thing when you're talking about load growth is, yes, it is growing. I think the question comes down to how much will it grow and in what regions will we really see it play out.
Absolutely. I think a lot has been made of this load growth story. It is, I think energy is one of those industries where it's cyclical. Topics become very hot for a while, and some of them bear out to be, very good trends, and some of them, fizzle. And so I'm really curious, as we're looking ahead to the load growth story, what are some of the things that you both are keeping an eye on? Like, if this thing changes, that might change your perspective higher or lower. Personally, one of mine is local opposition to data centers, and kind of how the companies building them are responding. Do they cancel? Do they persist? So that's something I'm tracking. What about John?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of focus and attention on the data center dynamics and how
Yeah.
that evolution is going to come into play, and I rightfully so, right? It is the single largest driver of demand growth that we expect between now and 2030, and that's where you see this very steep ramp rate in load growth expectations, and obviously everybody, the moment, trying to scramble and figure out how we solve that problem and bring enough generation online to support it. What I think is really key for our industry is how durable that load growth is beyond 2030, right? We're going to enter this period where the tax credit regime is going to phase out, and we're going to be in a whole new policy paradigm in 2031 and beyond. And the world looks very different where we have continued robust demand growth into the 2030s than it does if that starts to fizzle out for a variety of reasons, right? And it doesn't just matter to us, it matters to the gas markets as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of the gas facilities that are in the works at the moment are really targeting that post 2030 era for a variety of reasons, right? They've been kind of largely absent from the queues and the development process in the past because renewables have really come to the forefront, and so that process all takes time to get projects up and running and through the queues and ready to go. So they're really targeting that post 2030 environment. And if load growth fizzles, then I think it puts some real questions around the economics of all these power plants, not just clean energy units, and we get back into an environment of replacing, retiring facilities, or really competing with ongoing cost of existing facilities that are out there. And that's just a very different competitive landscape than one where we are growing at 2-3% a year, and really the entire pie itself is growing, and there's sort of enough room for all technologies to be coming at the table. So the durability, I think, is the big question for me.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to a larger problem in terms of how we forecast loads. And, as someone that works on forecasts and modeling, they're never going to be correct. It's just a matter of how wrong are they. But I think in the issue for the average consumer is if we expect all this load to come online and it doesn't, and then everyone's straddled with all these assets that becomes costly to the consumer, that's the issue. And so it points to a larger general issue of how load in this country requests to interconnect, and that it is very different from, say, the supply side, a generator, and the process it goes through. There is a reason that load forecasts tend to be overestimated because it is very easy to request to connect a load. All these hyperscalers, they may be hedging their bets and trying to interconnect in 5 different states because they're not entirely sure where they're going to be built. But those states are not necessarily incentivized to check whether they can't check if those data centers are being built elsewhere. And so I think there's a lot to be said of it just speaks to a general how we address load forecasting and interconnection requests from the demand side, not just the supply side.
Yeah, buzzword is dedupe, right? Like everyone's trying to remove all the duplicates from their accounting. But I mean, to your point, it is challenging, right? Like you've got all these independent players that aren't necessarily talking to each other, and it's not really to the data center's benefit to signal the 15 different places they're trying to drop their unit. So I mean, it is a challenge, and you layer on top of that, are we going to see efficiencies in compute? Is there going to be consolidation? Do we, how much compute is actually needed, right? And are we getting a little bit ahead of that at the moment? I don't know. Those are all unanswered questions at the moment, but have a big impact on what that ultimate load growth profile looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's maybe the one thing. It's almost functionally unknowable for some of these things, and we just kind of have to keep our eyes on it and monitor. So kind of keeping with the economic story of it all, I think from an advocacy standpoint, one of the most salient parts of the annual report is the chapter on the economic benefits that clean power brings. So looking at capital invested, looking at jobs, looking at contributions to GDP, and it is a very positive story. So a record 79 billion just in projects that came online last year, 150 billion in contributions to GDP. We cast around a lot for a helpful equivalent to that, and the best one we found is that is more than the GDP of over 100 countries. So a pretty sizable, hefty bit of the economy. So I'm curious, starting with John, like, was there anything in the economic benefits part of the report that caught your attention or that you found, particularly relevant to what's going on for the
Yeah,
industry?
aside from all of it, I mean,
Yeah.
look, this is like the bread and butter of the report, right?
Yep.
These are the storylines that we really want to call attention to and educate around. I mean, we are not only providing electrons to the grid, we are providing economic growth, job creation, local economy support across the country, and it's incumbent upon us to tell that story and make it known how big of an impact these facilities are having. It's not just the power plants themselves, right? There's a whole supply chain and service chain that sits behind it that is creating jobs all across the country, well-paying jobs, above average wages in almost all circumstances. And one piece that I think goes largely missed is how important of a story this is for rural America. I mean, almost every one of these projects is built outside of a city. And in some cases, they are the single largest investment to a county or a part of a state that area has seen in its entire history. I think at some point, there's a great stat in Iowa where there's like 99 counties in Iowa, and a third of them, their largest tax base is from wind projects, right? So these are facilities in a part of the economy that can have a real outsized effect on these communities. So one, I think it's just that, right? Telling that story. Second, at least for me as someone who's been in the industry for a long time, to see the evolution and the scale that we've been able to achieve. I remember back in 2012, when we were putting out my second annual market report, it was a record year for the wind space. We built 13 gigawatts of new wind power across the country, a record that was not eclipsed until 2020. And at the time, those projects represented something like $25 billion worth of investment. And we did a similar thing. We're trying to figure out, what is this equivalent to? How can we make a good comparison point? And we landed on the NFL. It was basically like the size of the NFL economy across it. So super interesting. Fast forward today, we're 3 times the size of that.
Yep.
$75 billion worth of new investment that's going into the country. Sorry, 79. So even further. So, significant growth in that space. And then we've just become more sophisticated in the way that we're able to talk about this as well, right? That 79 billion tells you one part of the story, but what we really want to know is how we're affecting the economy itself. And so we've been able to bring in, the value add statistics to the conversation as well. And $150 billion each and every year going into the U.S. economy has a real sizable impact on the state of play.
Yeah, it's the size of New Mexico. It's 150.
Yeah.
New Mexico's GDP. And
That was one of them.
yeah. And I'd be remiss to not mention, Hoyu on my team is the in-house economist that's putting all of these numbers together. And to me, the biggest standout to John's point is just our ability to talk about all of those indirect and induced jobs. It's not just the direct jobs, those that are working at the manufacturing facility sites or as technicians or in the headquarters. Those are all very important jobs, but all of their wages they earn, they are putting back into their local economy and creating more jobs. And our ability to capture that massive economic impact, I think, is just a really standout feature of what we work on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love seeing, some of that ripple effect in some of these places. I spoke with some folks who work at a battery, kind of battery installation outfit, and they were just talking about, this pays for, when we go out and shop locally, and it's dollars that stay in the community in a big way. So
yeah. And maybe one more. This is a stat that's not actually in the report, but I think it's important to highlight, and maybe it's on our list to think about for next year. But the majority of these investments are going to low-income counties across the country, right? So not only are we having a sizable effect in the rural economy, but the investments are going to those places that have either been left further behind because of some of the globalization and just evolution of the economy standpoints, or going to the areas where those jobs, those wages, those investments are most needed.
Yeah, definitely. I think, that brings up the next point about, affordability and prices and, especially, looking at how the cost of things go up. Electricity has been no exception to that, as we all know from some of the discourse. And one of the things that I found really striking in the report was a section that quantified, the increase in wholesale power prices year over year. So it showed a 41% increase uh, on average nationally. But the kind of caveat to that was that it was not an equal, every part of the country saw 41%. Actually, the parts of the country with some of the greatest, renewables generation and penetration, lower natural gas generation, saw a much slower, kind of reduced increase. So I think it's, the California ISO, ERCOT, SPP, all big renewables areas averaged an increase of 13%. So, it's pretty notable, I think, 41% versus 13%. And so I'm curious, Anthony, could you break that down a bit? Like, what were some of those drivers at the regional level?
Yeah, to your point, ERCOT, SPP, CAISO, those are the places that have the
Yeah.
most renewable penetration. And to kind of backtrack a little bit, when we talk about prices, there are two things that we go to: wholesale power prices and retail rates. Retail rates, which we'll probably get into a little bit, that is what the customer pays on their bill. The wholesale power price, that is what is the cost to generate that electricity. And within the electricity markets in the US, it is largely set by natural gas facilities. They're the marginal setting unit. And so those regions that are highly susceptible to fluctuations in high natural gas prices tend to then immediately see high wholesale power prices. And so in places like California, Texas, Middle America, there is a diversity of resources on their grid. So they are not having to use the most expensive gas plant during these peak hours, skewing their wholesale power prices. Whereas if you live in the Northeast, us in DC, we are faced with PJM, NISO, ISO New England. They are getting their natural gas from up north, from Canada. And during the winter, we are facing a lot of supply demand constraints. So you're not only using the natural gas for the power plants, but you're using the natural gas to heat your homes. And that tightening of demand increased with, or tightening of supply, increased supply and demand, effectively just creates these really high prices that highlight there. And what I always find interesting is if you graph the wholesale power prices over time in the US with natural gas prices, they are identical. They overlap with each other perfectly because natural gas is the price setting unit. And it's not that California or SPP or ERCOT are not using gas. They are. They just have, again, a more diverse set of resources that they're not having to use that most expensive gas unit. And then places like Texas, they have the ability to get cheap Gulf gas. But it does just play out very specifically of how much natural gas as a commodity impacts our wholesale power prices.
Definitely.
But also, surprise, surprise, that there's a diversity effect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and as we think about this load growth future, right, I think it's an important piece to keep in mind. And like, there's a reason why we're talking about an all the above strategy, right? There's a very compelling case to build a bunch of renewables to meet the energy needs that the system requires, and then back it up with gas and batteries to make sure that we've got the capacity needs to hit those peak load hours. When you run the models, when you do the analysis, that is the most affordable pathway for meeting demand, keeping up with resource adequacy and reliability. What is not the most affordable pathway is to choose a monolithic technology structure to try to get there. And when you look at what some of the forecasters are looking at, I think they internalize and understand that, and we are seeing a diversity of resources in those forecasts. I think the challenge today is, can we get through some of these administrative hurdles that are really challenging the ability to move renewable energy projects forward? And it's important, because if we can't, it's this consumer that's going to suffer, right? That's going to affect the affordability challenge. And it's not just the consumer, it's the economy as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
at some point, we won't be able to deliver for the data centers, for the electrification efforts that are taking place, and those will have a drag on economic growth.
And we have
Absolutely.
real life examples, not even speaking of the
Yeah.
forecast, but Winter Storm Fern that just occurred in January,
Yeah.
Texas, Middle America, everyone was hit with the same winter storm effects from the East Coast to Middle America. But Texas, SPP, all those regions saw significantly less prices during the storm because the wind was blowing, the sun was still out. They had that diverse mix of resources that brought the cost of electricity down. Whereas, again, places in the Northeast that do not have as much diversity in their resources saw incredibly high power prices as the cost of natural gas went up, and they didn't have any other resources to depend on.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, more diversity, less risk. Always a good principle. So I want to get back to the retail rate piece. But first, John, you've been watching these markets for a very long time, as you mentioned. Um, and and I'm curious if these sort of wholesale price advantages that these more, diverse generation mix areas have, or the more wind-rich areas like SPP have, has that been something over time that we've seen, or is it more now that we, economies of scale we've seen?
Well, I mean, it's been a regional story, right?
Yeah.
Like, Texas and California, the current market leaders, but we're the early innovators in this space, and we're able to realize some of those benefits earlier on. Now we're starting to see that proliferation to other markets. MISO, SPP for a little while now with their significant wind resources. We'd like to see more in PJM and help them with some of their affordability challenges as well. But yeah, I think it's been an evolution of a regional story as these technologies have been able to move into those various markets and start to have a real effect on what's happening from a wholesale power standpoint.
Absolutely. And there is just so much kind of diversity region by region. There's some great charts in the electricity section that show that, like region by region, what is the capacity mix, what is the generation mix. So encourage you all to check that out.
I mean, just as
Yeah.
evidence of that, right? And maybe 2 points on this. SPP, it is the most heavy renewable market in the country. Regularly gets 40, 50, 60% of its generation, primarily from wind at this point, though we're seeing more solar move into that market, and I would expect storage to come behind as well. Low power prices and fairly consistent and even power prices, right? We don't see them subject to the volatile swings when an event like Winter Storm Fern moves through, or a heat wave moves through, or something else. So, I think that's a tangible example of the hedge value of these technologies moving through. But second, it's also a demonstration of the ability to rely on significant renewable capacity to run a grid and keep it reliable,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of fear that as we hit higher and higher penetration rates across these markets, that we're going to run into more and more resource adequacy problems. And SPP is sort of a defined example of why that isn't necessarily a foregone conclusion. And look, like, these grid operators are smart folks. They know what they're doing. They're developing the tools and resources to be able to integrate these technologies and operate their grids reliably, efficiently, and at low cost in certain cases. So I think it's important to learn from those areas where we have seen real success and value add.
Absolutely. Um, So getting into that piece. Anthony, I'm so curious, one of my favorite hex maps of the report was a map that shows the average retail price for each state in 2025. And I think, we've seen some of these narratives swirling, as you both have mentioned, around, what is driving prices higher. And some folks have tried to assert, oh, it's the clean power. Actually, the data kind of shows the opposite. But sometimes the retail rates don't reflect that. There's that discrepancy between what we're seeing at the cost level for wholesale prices and then what is translated into people's bills. And so, curious, Anthony, if you could give us a little bit of context around that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very nuanced, and that's
Yeah.
where the problem comes in. If you're looking at the wholesale power slide, California has the cheapest electricity.
Yep.
They have a ton of solar and storage. It makes sense that on a wholesale basis, they have the cheapest electricity. You look at that retail map slide, they have one of the highest electricity retail rates in the country. And it is not because of all the clean power, it is simply due to the fact that wildfire mitigation, insurance, all of that adaptation and resilience that they have to pay for is going into the retail rate. And so it is a lot of, different stories are occurring in different parts of the country as to why your retail rates are going up. I'd say the blanket kind of general reason we can ascribe to why retail rates throughout the country have gone up in the last few years kind of come down to two things. One are the increase in natural gas prices. And while the wholesale side sees that pretty immediately, those that provide you your retail power, they are kind of hedging. They're not going to send you those shocks immediately. So when natural gas prices shot up in 2021, 2022, that effect of those was slowly kind of rolled out over the next few years. The other is just the cost of transmission and distribution lines and replacing those. That side of your retail bill, that's been increasing as, our electricity grid is old. We've kind of just hit a time where you've needed to replace those, but couple that with all these extreme weather events that are occurring, those destroy, the local power lines that you see in your neighborhood. Those are very expensive to replace, and they're faced with the same supply chain tariff issues that every other industry is facing. And so replacing them has become expensive. I think the main thing in terms of talking about retail rates and clean power is understanding the role that clean power has in it. Any place that you live, the person that's required to give you your power, they are required to meet your electricity needs both affordably and reliably. And kind of how that breaks down to me is there's an energy need. That's the affordability piece. Like during most hours of the day, can I get cheap electricity? And then reliability. If there is some extreme weather event or all the electricity requirements go really high, will there not be a blackout? And so the reason, again, going back to the diverse set of resources that you have and ensuring against that is all the clean power helps you meet energy needs while having a mix of clean power, some gas, maybe nuclear, battery storage. That allows you to meet the capacity needs and the reliability piece when it's needed most. And any kind of optimized grid combines those two. And when you have that, that is the best case where you can have the most affordable rates. Again, you get into other dynamics of certain states, again, California, wildfire problems, that is a bit outside the lane of what we can do. But at the very least, clean power is pushing downward pressure on rates.
Absolutely. Yeah, John, anything to add about?
I-
Yeah, that was a
Seems
good.
just right to me.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's absolutely. And I think as folks continually kind of dig into the drivers for retail rate cases, more and more you see, yeah, wildfire risk, extreme weather events. So something that,
Yeah,
yeah,
the part of the challenge with retail rates is they're a lagging indicator,
yeah,
right? Where rates are set today are kind of reflective of where wholesale power prices are, where expectations are taking them, but also sort of this accumulated effect of wildfires and tree
mm,
damage to power lines and the need to build out additional distribution systems and interconnect different load centers around that footprint, right? So it takes time for the retail rates to sort of catch up and tell us kind of what's going on and how that's going to flow into a consumer's bill. I think the important story, at least for us, is that we know that clean energy provides that hedge value, right? Regardless of where those other things are going to move, we're not going to be able to predict where wildfires are going to happen or where trees are going to fall down on power lines and require that maintenance. But what we can do is understand that, yes, the more we can move those expensive marginal units off the margin and generate more of that energy with a low cost, zero variable cost resource, the more protection we'll have against those volatile events that tend to drive most of the wholesale power price spikes, right?
Absolutely. So that, we've talked a lot about, you know, what could be, what's happening in the modeling, what could happen in the future. And there is a whole section of the report that looks at the outlook from a couple different angles. We have some pages on the current pipeline. So those are projects that we know are, in the later stage of development or are under construction. And we have a look at, what is the consensus around, what do market watchers think? Every outlook, every forecast is wrong, but, we don't know how is kind of the truism, as Anthony mentioned. And we also have ACP's own in-house forecast this year, and a lot of work has been done by John and Anthony and Ben and the team to kind of create this view into the future through 2030. And so when I look at it, it's pretty robust. The industry is strong on its merits, on the economics, on demand, on many factors. And I'm curious, do you both find like a consistent view across outlooks? Are there, where are we seeing diversity of opinion and where are we seeing consensus?
Yeah, so I'm going to do another bump and run here because I want to
Great.
talk a little bit about our program and what we've been able
Yeah.
to develop at ACP. This has been a really fun and I think interesting part of this job is to be able to bring additional resources in, expertise, so that we can enhance ACP's capabilities in this space and not only bring more value to you guys as members, but also be able to better inform the advocacy environment, especially as we see either policy changes or just market changes so that we can best communicate those potential impacts to stakeholders, policymakers, et cetera. So when I first came to AWEA, ACP, the old ACP, everything was done kind of back in Excel models and, fairly crude tools, but they could at least point you in the right direction. As the market has become more dynamic, as we've brought other technologies under the umbrella, we've basically figured out that that is no longer an adequate solution for really understanding what is going on. And so we needed to go out and procure the proper resources and tools to really answer those questions. So we've brought in not only the human capital, we have a number of modelers on the team who have been doing this for various consultants and spending a lot of time thinking about the dynamics of the market and how they can operationalize them and represent them in the model. But we've actually gone out and got the model, right? So we have a capacity expansion and a production simulation software package that allows us to really unpack, what we, not only the effects of different policy changes, but to incorporate some of the market dynamics that we're seeing and understand what those ripple effects look like. And so we've been able to take that expertise and tool capability and pair it with the broader expertise of the industry to build something that we think is reflective of kind of an industry consensus view, essentially, right? So Anthony and his team do all the modeling up front. They come up with an outlook, and then basically I go around and stress test it with a bunch of our members of like, all right, here's our current view. What do you think of that? Where do you think we're wrong? Where do you think we're right? What additional perspective do you want to bring into the equation? And that's how we ultimately land on the outlook that we've presented in the annual report. So it's a combination of the modeling plus sort of this industry perspective and expertise that comes into play. In terms of comparison to the consultants, we've added that in as well, right? Like the certain piece about our model is that it's wrong, but it is still a helpful tool, and I think comparing it to what some of the other market observers are seeing is a valuable exercise and can give us just some insight on, areas that other firms are focusing on or things that are kind of forefront on folks' mind. A couple pieces just to maybe bring the forefront of the conversation. Wind is a big area of uncertainty, right? I think less so because of the economics and more so because of the political environment. How are things going to play out with FAA determinations and DOD and, just the broader presidential memorandum challenges that we saw. We've seen some good movement from a litigation standpoint in that space that hopefully forces the administration to change what they're doing and how they're approaching wind in particular, but solar as well. But I think wind is one of those areas where uh, a fair amount of head scratching going on just to try to really understand what things look like for reasons that are non-economic, right? And then storage is the other one. I mean, it's a challenging technology to model in the first place, and a lot of the value of storage in these markets does tend to follow along with the increasing penetration of renewables. So the evolution of wind and solar in these markets dictates a lot of what the storage story looks like. And so not that the divergence of views is huge, but there are a fair amount of different takes on that front.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say the storage to me is the big kind of question of where it's built out and how it's valued. So, California and Texas are very different from other markets. There is a lot of renewables there. It's why it's been built. But battery storage is, I think it's high value, and everywhere else is providing that resource adequacy need. And that then turns into a market dynamic of how are they valuing our resources and the role that they provide to the grid. And so battery storage, is that provides resource adequacy and making sure that it's valued in the non kind of Texas, California markets such that it's able to be built up even more. I think that's kind of one of the open-ended questions that you see in a lot of different consultant models of how battery storage will be deployed.
Definitely. Yeah, it's had a very, you know, exponential rise, and I think we're still kind of figuring out where the value opportunity is, especially as you get kind of that point of saturation in some markets. So we're nearing the part of this hour where we're excited to hear from those of you in the audience. If you have any questions, please type them in. We'd love to see what you're wondering and how you're feeling about the market and what questions you have. But I have a whole lot more questions. So as I wait to see some roll in, yeah, I'll keep going. So great. Well, okay. So we've had, the various layers of kind of prediction. There's the outlook, there's the pipeline, there's, and then there's also, what is right in front of us, 2026. And I'd be curious to hear, what is from each of you, what is one prediction you have for 2026 heading into the year? Mr. John?
Oh, this is where it shows that I didn't read the memo ahead of time. I have to know what the questions look like. So do
I don't know
one
if this
on
was in
the-
the memo,
on
so
the-
I can start.
on the
Yeah.
fly. Yeah, I mean, look, my expectation is that 26 is a bigger year than 2025, and I'm both really excited by that prospect, but also fearful of how that will be interpreted and communicated with this administration, right? Like it's great for the power grid. It's great for the companies that are serving the space. It's great for the consumers who are looking to meet their energy needs affordably. It paints a target on our back,
Yeah.
right? With an administration that is somewhat hostile to the growth of the industry and the advancement of these technologies. To be showcasing another record year, if you look at we as part of our data collection efforts, talk to all of you, our member companies, to get a sense of, not only the projects that you're developing, but where and when do you expect those projects to come online. And when we look at those figures, that indicating a market that is 60 to 70 gigawatts of new installations. Now, a lot of those projects run into challenges and delays and other things, and we see a lot slip into the next year, especially that we don't have these kind of hard credit expiration deadlines anymore or at least not till 2030. But it's still looking like a record year again, and we're going to have to become much more polished in the way that we're talking about and communicating that effect. Because again, it is a situation where those projects were well underway before this administration came into being, and a lot of the hurdles that projects that expect to be built in 27, 28, 29, and 30, they're the ones that are running into the hurdles that the administration has put into place. And so that, when we get to those years, we'll be telling a different story depending on how a resolution goes in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. A very nuanced kind of record year, but
Yeah.
also the future.
Yeah.
Anthony.
My interest is always kind of how markets are evolving, and so that was kind of where I got my start and what I'm interested in. And so I think it'll be really curious, again, speaking to how is battery storage valued in these markets, how, not that I think there will be some major change in transmission policy this year, but to me, it just, all this load growth, all the renewable growth that's added, like it just speaks to the need of updated transmission lines. I think one of the starkest examples of this that I saw most recently was in Winter Storm Fern in PJM. All of the prices in the eastern side, so not Illinois, had really high electricity prices. But if you looked at a heat map, nodal map of the prices in Illinois, they were all negative because all the wind that is there, they had a surplus of wind, but they couldn't get it to the rest of PJM. And so simple things like that I'm like, it's the data is showing to you right there that if you can get that power, cheap electricity over, it spreads out that cost to all consumers. And I just am always kind of intrigued by how the markets will adapt once they see that data. And then probably the last one in terms of market is just this new kind of Western markets that are being created of either joining SPP and joining CAISO, and just how that will play out as the energy market nerd in me.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
nice plug for the value of building new transmission.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, less than 1,000 miles built in 2025. Not nearly enough, I think. Well, we were starting to get a bunch of questions in, so I'll hold mine. If anyone's so curious, email me about my predictions for 2026. So getting into it. So how, and this is, the topic that on everybody's mind, how does a prolonged conflict in Iran impact the outlook on future energy prices? And I'll jump into that one.
I think you should.
should,
You're
yeah,
a
yeah.
gas expert.
So, so I actually think, a lot of folks have been talking about, global energy prices, oil and gas, this is really going to reverberate back and raise natural gas prices, and that's going to have an impact. And my view as a former natural gas analyst and nerd is no, I don't think. I mean, not in the present, not in the.
Well, we haven't seen it reflected in the prices, right?
No, we have not. I mean, Henry Hub, NYMEX Henry Hub futures, are, if I was still writing these stories, I'd say tepid. I'd say lackluster. It's, it's $3 per MMBTU. And for those who are not as jazzed about natural gas, I'd say $4 and above is where we start to say pricey. $2 and below is where we're like, wow, so cheap. $3 per MMBTU is kind of the Goldilocks of, producers are still interested in producing. They can, make some money, and demand is supportive, but it's not, anything crazy. It's not super high. And when we look at the strip, for 2026, 2027, we're still in that kind of Goldilocks $3 per MMBTU range. And I think a lot of that has to do with, how exposed are markets to the global market, whereas, oil markets, global price of oil, very exposed. There has been some, increasing exposure through LNG exports, but for the near term, I'd say from now for the next 2-3 years, I'm not seeing that exposure widen to the point that it reverberates back into natural gas prices. But yeah, I mean, any thoughts?
As we think about it from the industry perspective, I think it's a focus on the macroeconomic effects,
Absolutely.
right? Less what are the particular pain points for our industry, the natural gas space. I think it's what does a prolonged conflict mean for the the U.S. economy, but the broader global economy, and how does that reverberate through, you know, inflationary pressures, rates,
Yeah.
as well as commodity prices, all things that affect the cost of our products dearly. So I think that's where we'll start to see it show up rather than, tweaks to the competitive landscape specifically within the electricity sector.
Definitely.
And a general adoption. Like, will this switch those that are going to the gas pump and be like,
Yeah.
these prices are insane. Like, I'm going to buy an electric vehicle now. Whether or not they will because retail rates are so high, probably not. But there is kind of that, there's another impact of your gasoline prices are going up. So does that increase our electrification demand that in turn could impact power prices? So I agree. It's all kind of more macroeconomic to our industry and a much more kind of long term.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, ironically, as someone who does not drive, will not drive, I used to cover gasoline markets. And, the thing about gasoline markets, pain at the pump is very much, prices go up like a rocket and then it's like a feather coming down. So I think we will see kind of an extended period of these sustained higher gasoline prices that could incentivize, an increase in electric vehicle adoption and more, more electricity demand in those spots. Awesome. Well, I think we have time, let's see, for maybe one, maybe two more questions. So the next question is around, still the outlook. If we predicted the market in 2030, what would that look like after the tax credits go away? And actually, fabulously, there is a chart in the annual report looking at exactly that of the post-tax credit world. Anthony, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, at the very least, I'll say that resource costs are continuing to fall for our technology. Even without tax credits, we are still the competitive resource in most regions of the U.S. Again, all of this is very regional specific, but by and large, clean power, even without the tax credits, will be cost competitive. And it's why you see all of these outlooks, all of the outlooks that John was speaking to from both our side and the consultant side. There is still such a robust mix of clean power being added because, load is growing. By how much, that's still a question, but it is growing and clean power offers that solution. And it's why, even without the tax credits, we still see a pretty similar outlook.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be a transition period. I've been through a number of PTC, ITC expirations before. The story is generally the same. That first year afterwards is a challenging year as the market sort of readjusts to the new environment. I think thankfully we've got 5 years to figure that out, right? And figure out ways to continue to bring costs down, to figure out how we cushion that transition period a bit more. I think sustained and durable load growth goes a long way into helping with that problem. But, let's assume that the administration gets out of the way a bit and the industry builds to keep up with demand. 2030 is going to be a big year. And all those projects are going to be offering with a PTC or an ITC. And so the pricing environment is going to look very different in 2031. And that it's just going to take time for buyers and utilities to get reoriented to that new market reality and to think through how they move that through their IRP process and their commissions or their investment boards or whatever the case is where they need to go get approval for that. So, I think it's right to be concerned with what that transition period looks like and start to think through ways that we can cushion or ease that transition. But to your point, I think as we get beyond 2031, the expectation is that we come back to a place that is supportive of, continued investment, continued growth for the industry.
Definitely, definitely. Well, so I'm looking at the clock. It has turned red as the kind of cue to wrap it up. I guess to conclude, kind of if there's one thing, somebody has this massive report in front of them, and what would you both recommend? You have 1 second to check out the report. What chart you're like, that's a cool one. Give it a look. I'll start. Well, you both think about that. So one of my favorite visuals from the report has to be a hex map that is focused on the amount of water that is saved each year by that state's renewable generation. And I think that is a, underappreciated story and an underappreciated narrative around clean power, especially in the West, especially at a time when there's, a lot more water scarcity. There's a lot of wrangling over who gets water from the Colorado River. And that, clean power is not only part of the solution for power prices, but also for, water conservation in a sense. So if anyone's trying to tell that story, there is a great hex map for each state showing how much water is saved. So
Mine's kind of, it's two, and it's an optimism one and a reality one. The first chart is the one where it's like how much clean power has been, of all the additions that's been added in the last 5 years, clean power makes up the vast majority, and it's, dominated by solar, wind, storage in that chart. But the other is when you look at what does the total capacity and generation mix look like. We have grown significantly over the last few years, but it's not like we are dominating just yet. We are a growing force, but I think it's, talk to someone that's against clean power, they're thinking the entire world is ran by clean power, and I personally hope it one day is. But until then, I'd say like there's a reality set of like we're still growing, we're still we're a dominant force of it, but there is still a healthy mix of all the other resources in our system.
definitely.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to check out the congressional district stripes graphics that we got in there showcasing where these projects are being built. And the reason why I want to focus attention there is we need more Republican support for this industry, right? And the fact of the matter is the vast majority of these projects, 79%, if I'm not mistaken, are being built in Republican districts and helping constituents who have voted to put Republican candidates in Congress and in the White House. And so we as an industry need to do a better job of telling that story and building support among those lawmakers.
Definitely, definitely. Well, great. Thank you everyone for joining us today, or those who are catching this on the rewatch. Really appreciate it. I want to thank John and Anthony for joining us as well. Please check out the report, check out the interactive website, all of the resources, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.